Good morning. Welcome to QX Church. This is Pastor Scott Conway. Find us online at qxchurch.org. And today we're talking about sin. We don't talk about sin very often, but there's a principle. I use it a lot in counseling. I use it a lot even in coaching. And I'll talk about it from time to time. But I was going over my notes. And as I am preparing, probably this being my last year, saying what are some highlights I need to touch on, and this really seemed to be one of them. As I went back through my notes, it appears as though I've really only talked about this twice before. Once again, I've been pastoring here under both of the separate church names since 2005. Right now it's 2019. So come this Easter, we will have been doing, I guess actually it's January now, because I had started originally with a Sunday night ministry, and then we went to a Sunday morning ministry Easter 2 years following. So in 14 years, I've taught on this twice. So now it's going to be, in 14 years, I will now have taught on it 3 times. The idea of this in sin is we put sin in 3 basic categories. And so the title of the lesson today is Sins of Malice, Selfishness, and Connection. Quest Zion puts sin in 3 major categories. The first category is sins of malice, and we will talk about and unpack that in considerable detail. Then there's sins of selfishness, and we'll unpack that in much less detail. And then there's sins of connection, and we'll talk about that a little bit. Sins of malice are pretty simple and straightforward. They are sins that hurt other people. It's when you do something that misses the mark, and the thing that you're doing that misses the mark is doing harm. It's creating pain. It's doing damage. The whole concept of sin comes from archery. So if you have no sin, that's a bullseye. If you miss the bullseye, that's sin. The archery term would be sin 1. So if the bullseye is right here and you miss the bullseye by a fraction of an inch, that's a sin. That's sin 1. It may seem like it's a relatively trivial sin, but it's still a sin. You were close. It was really, really good, but you still missed. And if you consider it from like a warfare standpoint, where someone is attacking you, and someone's trying to kill you, and I shoot an arrow at them, and I just miss them. Are you going to go like, well, hey, he's still going to get me, but that's okay. That was a really good shot. You got close. Or do you want me to hit the person who's trying to do you harm? And so that's why this whole concept of did you hit your target or not was so critical in any warfare skill, because people live or die on whether you got your target or not. And so this archery principle that we see in more of a competitive archery environment, because that's where we have the lines, because when you're in combat you either got them or you didn't got them, that's it. Was sin 1 was that close, but you didn't get the bullseye. Sin 2 was that second circle. That's like, okay, that wasn't as close. You still hit the target, but you need to work on that. Because if your archery is going to be effective, whether it's for warfare or for hunting, you got to hit that bullseye. I mean, if you're out hunting and if you don't get the deer, your family's not eating, you better hit the deer. And then you had sin 3. Sin 3 is like, you got the target. So at least we know where your arrow went. But you really need to work on that. So sin 1, sin 2, sin 3, typically the line there. But then you could also just flat out miss. So the idea of sin is just missing the mark. That there is a bullseye, there is a target, there is something, someone, some circle, something to hit, and you didn't get it right. You didn't get it exactly correct. You didn't get it righteous, exactly the way it's supposed to be. And we have vocabulary we use sometimes that gets kind of fuzzy. So some of the people say, they're like, oh, I just totally messed that up. And you look at what they did and go, well, that was really close. That was like a sin 1. I mean, you didn't get it right, but you did really well. And then there's other people who say things like, well, you know, maybe I didn't get that exactly as perfect as I really wanted to. And you go, you didn't even hit the target. What are you talking about? Didn't get it as perfect as you wanted it to. You fired in the general direction of the target, but I have no idea how you missed. Your arrow's way past there somewhere. And we're so fuzzy with our vocabulary because when we're expressing such ideas, typically we're doing it emotionally, not rationally. We're not expressing what happened, we're expressing how we feel about what happened. And sometimes we're expressing how we feel about ourselves based upon what happened. And so sometimes you could be inartful over the way you turn the phrase, and you really could have done that a little bit better. But you really wanted to nail it right now. This was like a high-stakes moment for you, and you feel like, oh, I just totally ruined everything. It's like, well, okay, you split an infinitive, and you left a dangling participle, but that's no big deal. The only 3 people who noticed are the English majors. And sometimes people will really mess it up. They're cruel to people. They hurt people. They do damage to their relationships and say, yeah, maybe that wasn't quite as perfect as I really wanted it to be. I could probably stand to make that a little bit better. And so like, you could stand to actually hit the target. Because when you actually hit targets, now think about doing this as an archery coach or instructor. You walk up to the target and you see where the arrows hit. Some arrows are in the bullseye, some arrows are in sin 1, some arrows are in sin 2. But you can kind of see how far are they missing, which way are they missing, is it a grouping pattern, whether there's a really, really tight group but it's kind of up and to the left. Well, then what do you know? It's like, well, your grouping's pretty good. You're doing pretty much exactly the same thing every single time. We just need to adjust your aim so we move the group. What if you take a look at the arrows are just all over the place? All of them are in the target, but they're all over the place. Like, okay, we have a grouping problem. What we need to do is have you do exactly the same thing every single time so we can get that group tighter, and now you can adjust. What if someone doesn't even hit the target? You walk up to the bullseye and go, 1, 2, 3. How many arrows did you shoot? You shot 12 arrows. Okay, well, the other 9 just missed. Did they miss high? Did they miss low? Did they miss left? How are you going to fix that? Well, you're going to have to fix it by starting off like, okay, we need you to actually hit the target so we can see what the problem is. So that's the whole idea of sin in general. The idea of sin is there is a bullseye. A bullseye exists. And you missed it. Now, when we talk about sins of commission, that's when you let fly an arrow and the arrow did not hit the bullseye. But there's also sins of omission, and omission is when you are obligated to take the shot, and you didn't take the shot. Now, some people may be obligated to take the shot. They didn't take the shot because they had so much confidence they would miss the bullseye, they had to make a judgment call. Would it be better to not even take the shot, or would it be better to take the shot and wildly miss that bullseye? And so sometimes people make an intelligent judgment call on sins of omission because they don't really see how to hit the bullseye. But if you still had an obligation, you didn't hit the bullseye. So bullseyes don't get hit by people who don't take shots. Bullseyes get missed by people who do take shots and miss the bullseye. And if you're aiming for a bullseye and you completely miss the target and your arrow goes flying past, that can create a problem. So if I'm in battle and I'm trying to get that person and I miss that person, my arrow goes past that person. Well, as long as there's nothing but enemies past that person, I might be okay. But what if I'm doing something like urban warfare? What if I'm on a counter-terrorist team and you're having to try to take down targets in a civilian environment and you can't miss because there are civilians past that target? And so it's a judgment call. And all that's just on the subject of sin. That if we understand sin is missing the mark, sin is not necessarily evil. Sin is not even necessarily all that bad. It's just not what it's supposed to be. And so Jesus is worthy and true to forgive us our sins. He is worthy and true to forgive us every time we miss that mark. It's almost as though he walks up to the target with us and says, oh, well, look at this. You fire 12 shots, and 9 of them missed the bullseye. And you go like, yes, I'm sorry, Lord. I'm working on it. And trying. Okay, well, let's pull out the ones you missed. Here's your arrows back. Let's go back and try again. And you get to keep on trying until all of your arrows are in that bullseye. At which time, it's time to say, good job. All 12 arrows are in the bullseye. It took you 16 tries to get all 12 arrows in the bullseye. So now let's do it again, and let's get it in better than 16. Let's see if we can get it in 15, or 10 tries, or 3 tries. And if we can get all of it, or almost all of it in 1 try, now let's move the target back and let's make it more challenging. And let's work on that until we get all of the bullseyes. So in all of our misses, we put our misses in 3 categories: malice, selfishness, and connection. Sometimes we miss on purpose. The assumption in the archery concept of sin is you at least know there is a bullseye. You know what the bullseye is. You know what you're aiming for, and you are at least trying to get your shot. But not always. Sins of malice are sins that hurt other people. Sins of selfishness are things that you do that might only hurt yourself. Sins of connection are things you do that might be non-ideal, they've still missed the bullseye, but what's behind that is a desire to connect with people in a way that doesn't hurt people. And you can guess from this that here at QX Church we have our biggest problem with sins of malice. Because once malice is involved, the rules change. So at Quest Xeon, when we try to stop people from doing wrong, this is the wrong upon which we focus first. Sins of malice. When people are doing things that hurt other people. We're most interested in getting people to stop doing wrong things that hurt other people. Now, if there's someone who is pretty consistently managing to never hurt anybody, well, we think that's pretty good. And we're probably not going to really jump on them for anything else. In fact, we're as likely to commend them as anything else because no one's getting hurt. For ourselves, for me, that means me in my own personal individual life. For ourselves, our first order of business will typically be, if we're hurting people, stop hurting people. So if I find out that something I'm doing, or the way that I'm doing it, is hurting someone and it doesn't need to be there, I need to stop hurting people. Now every once in a while you realize there may not be an alternative. And there are circumstances where that may well be true. Warfare is an obvious example. But if you're hurting someone unnecessarily, just stop. Because here's the thing, negative is 4 times more powerful than positive. We learned this concept, we talked about it in the Phileo bank account. And there's a lot of research to back it up. In fact, I recently saw some research from the Gottman Institute. And in their research, they had only recently determined or confirmed, yet again, because I've been seeing stuff like this for years, that it takes a 5-to-1 ratio of good to bad to improve a relationship. If it is less than 5-to-1, the relationship does not improve. If the ratio of good to bad drops down to less than 3 good for every bad, the relationship is deteriorating. So this 4-to-1 ratio is being affirmed in recent research. So if we're hurting people, stop hurting people. So as a general rule, we believe The first thing to show up in any kind of spiritual growth is being more loving. Being more loving. And we believe that we are to love God, to love others, and to love ourselves. Thus, learning to be more loving to people is often the first and primary result of spiritual growth. Well, part of loving someone means you don't want to hurt them. You don't want to give yourself permission to hurt them. If someone says, I love you, and punches you in the face, and you go, what are you doing that for? Well, you don't understand, you see, because I have these issues that make me want to punch people in the face. So I love you, punches you in the face. What kind of a relationship are you going to want to develop with this person? Probably none, even if it's in a martial arts contest. Like, we don't punch people in the face around here. What are you doing? Oh, I just like punching people in the face. Because, I had this thing. So I know there was this thing. Let's put on the gloves and get in the ring and do it in the proper training context. You don't just walk into the gym and just punch people in the face. We don't do that here. Well, you don't understand. I know about the thing. You told me there's a thing. That still doesn't give you permission to walk around punching people in the face. And when you use a physical metaphor that obvious, people go, well, that would be ridiculous. That'd be insane. That'd be criminal. You don't do that. But then when we think about, what are the hurts that are lasting? Most physical pain stuff we will recover from. In fact, that's a lot of why the physical pain is there. It's there to warn us that if this goes much past this, it's going to do some damage. If it goes too much past that, it's going to do some damage that we may not be able to recover from. And it could be crippling, or it could even be fatal. And so the moderate amounts of pain between here and there are a warning for us that, okay, this direction of stuff happening to me is bad. So if you have not had the type of injury that lasts with the only injuries you've ever had, but you've ever bumped an elbow, banged a head, had any kind of hurt, did you recover? Over 99% of the things that happen to us physically, we recover from. And most people get through most of their lives without a serious, debilitating, crippling kind of injury. And even those of us who do very often find there's ways to adjust and adapt. These days, more than ever in history. So for most people, the thing that haunts them the most is commonly an emotional injury, something somebody said, something somebody did, some experience you did or did not have that lingers with you emotionally and to this day may still affect your sense of identity. That in some way, shape, or form you've absorbed, this is who I am. But very often the way parents treat their kids might affect how I think of myself as a man. How I think of, how martial arts masters I've interacted with might affect how I think of myself as a martial artist. Could be that the way I interact with a spouse helps influence the way I think about myself as a husband. That how things go with my kids might affect how I think of myself as a father. And if I carry these things with me, they can affect my identity. Well, the malice part gets to be, well, then if I give myself permission to treat you a certain way, can I affect how you think of yourself as a man or a woman? How you think of yourself as a father or a mother? How you see yourself as a human being, as a successful person or a failure? As someone who's a treasure or someone who's trash? And that if my opinion is important to you, how I treat you may have an influence. And one of the sad truths of human reality is that very often if I mistreat you, something in your heart will say, oh, well, that must be true. But if I treat you well, something in the human heart very often says, well, yeah, but if he really knew, he'd know what a piece of garbage I am. And then we don't trust compliments. But boy, do we believe the bad stuff. And whichever ones we most accept very commonly comes from the one that resonates with our self-talk. The one that is echoing what we say to ourselves, the ones that affect us emotionally the most. And so for sins of malice, when we're talking about verbal hurt, emotional hurt, we might be feeding someone's negative self-image. We might be doing damage to their positive self-image. We might be tearing them down instead of building them up. In short, from a Christian perspective, we might be aligning ourselves with the devil rather than aligning ourselves with God. We might be fulfilling the devil's agenda in somebody's life and destroying, doing violence to God's agenda in their life. Because I believe God's agenda is love. I believe that God loved us so much. He loved us in such a way that he was willing to give up his son for us. Oh, that's good stuff. Someone should write that down. Because God did so love the world that he gave his only begotten son. God loved us so much that he would rather show up as one of us and die for us rather than have to judge us. To give him a way out of passing judgment on us. And very often when we engage in sins of malice, we're doing violence to God's love for his people. When we engage in sins of malice, we're actually helping Satan do his job. We are volunteering for his work. His job is easy enough as it is. I don't want to give him any more help. So if I'm doing something that is doing damage to other people, I need to stop. Which then means we take that idea out one more step. If others are hurting people, intervene when and how appropriate. So if others are hurting people, intervene when appropriate, intervene how appropriate. Now sometimes this is a judgment call. Sometimes this is obvious. Now in the obvious ones, at particular high levels of dangers, we might intervene physically, right here, right now. We're not going to wait. We're not wasting any time. We are getting in the middle of this thing. We are going to do something about it. We might call the police. We might try to talk people down. We might move people to safety. We might call on someone to help. Now you pick up the phone, dial 911, get the cops here as fast as possible. I've done that one. Talk people down. I've done that one dozens of times. Move people to safety. I've had to do that one a few times. Call on someone to help. I've done that one a couple of times. More often I've been the one called to come help. But especially like when someone's a kid, I mean, what do we tell them to do? Go get help. Or go get a parent. Go get a teacher, depending whether they're at home or they're at school. So if someone's getting hurt, get help. Help them. We might do any combination of these. Sometimes, though, dealing with someone hurting someone is less obvious. More of a judgment call. If the danger isn't imminent, meaning that it's not about to happen right here, right now, maybe it's unsafe, potentially a threat, might even be a potential high-level threat, but eventually, what do you do? Someone with diabetes isn't treating their body well. Is that dangerous? Yeah. Could cause all kinds of long-term problems, even up to and including death. Do you deal with a situation like that at the same level you would if someone's being physically violent and so could hospitalize someone? No, you don't. The imminency isn't there. And then sometimes the damage isn't clear. Is this doing damage? If so, how much damage? Is it doing damage at a level that I really need to intervene, not intervene? And sometimes it might be harder to determine when you intervene, if you intervene, how you intervene. We have to decide based on the totality of the circumstances. And it can be a tough call sometimes, and sometimes you'll wrestle with it. Part of the beauty of non-imminent situations is it does give you time to wrestle with it. It gives you time to make the judgment call. And you can think about it, because sometimes if you make one move, that eliminates the rest of your options. But it might be the move you need to make. But if you have time, you can grapple with it. Like one of the things I tell people very often when we're dealing with some kind of like negotiated issue is, if you are nice first, you can always get more forceful. But if you go forceful first, it's harder to get nice afterwards. And so if I step into a potentially violent situation, I try to talk everybody down, I can possibly engage, but does that mean I can't hit anybody now? If I need to, I still can. But if I walk in and I start punching people, and then I say, okay, now let's have a civil discussion, that's probably not going to happen unless I have them scared of me. And this is one of the challenges we very often have of why people engage in malicious ways to produce outcomes, is because if our focus on the outcome is just the behavior, violence is a way to get that outcome. Physical violence, verbal violence, emotional violence, relationship violence, things that are doing damage is a way to get compliance by people who are afraid of further pain. But in situations where we may need the relationship to continue, where we may desire for the relationship to continue, we're doing damage to the relationship as we do damage to the person in the relationship with us in order to obtain a behavior. Instead of seeking to get collaboration, where we work together to develop a solution. We both take responsibility for an outcome. And we work together for that because we're a team, we're partners. And so it's a mindset, it's a way of seeing things. And obviously, my mindset is clear. I have a clear collaboration-based bias. I don't like to hurt people. Why? I don't like to be hurt. I don't want people intentionally hurting me to get an outcome in behavior. So I want to intentionally not hurt anyone else to get an outcome of behavior. I try to do a loving approach, a collaborative approach, a cooperative approach, a partner approach. And I would rather the outcome take longer and happen with less pain than I get my compliance right now because I threatened to punch you in the face. Or because I did punch you in the face and you're afraid I'm going to punch you in the face again. Except instead of doing it with a fist, I'm doing it with my words. That I'm being cruel. I'm breaking you down, and I might even be relying on breaking you down in order for me to get my way. And I've watched this happen. In particular, I watched a husband and a wife. The husband was constantly complaining about like these top 3 things with the wife. Finally, she got the wherewithal to start doing something about these top 3 things. And she started getting them coming together. And then he started sabotaging her improvement and trying to break her down because as she got fixed, now he was the broken one in the relationship. He liked her being the broken one in the relationship, but he was broken, but she was more broken. So that he could have this illusion that he's doing fine because look how messed up she is. And to him, that felt like, I'm the man. Because I'm okay. My wife's messed up, though. And he started undermining his wife rather than fix his own stuff. That was pretty malicious. So a legal position on some of these things. Sins of malice, sins of selfishness, sins of connection. Secular protective purposes for a secular law. Now this one can be tricky too. It's not like it's like totally easy. Most societies these days are operated by secular governments. What that means is the government does not represent a particular church. That we don't have, the United States of the Baptist Church. We don't have the United States of the Presbyterian Church. We have the United States of America, and we are secular states. Now, we may draw a lot of our philosophy from Judeo-Christian values, but we don't have a denomination in charge of the nation. So because most societies operate by secular governments, the secular law must have a secular purpose. So despite the United States having "In God We Trust" as a motto, it is not the role of government to enforce religious law. Now, in particular, think about how important this can be as religious majorities change. What if Catholic doctrine was government law? And it doesn't matter if you're Catholic or not a Catholic, you are required to obey Catholic doctrine. What if we get a whole bunch of Buddhists, enough to have a majority in the state, and now Buddhist doctrines become the law? What if it's Muslim doctrines? What if it's Pentecostal, holiness movement, fundamentalist doctrines? And so the more you start thinking about religions you may not agree with, and think, what if the church doctrine became government-enforced law, where you could be literally arrested if the Seventh-day Adventists took over the government and they impose a Seventh-day Adventist view, and now the government will come impose the Sabbath rules on you. If you dare open up for business after sunset on a Friday, you're doing any Sabbath violating stuff before sunset on Saturday, you could go to jail for that. So when we begin to look particularly at the religions we disagree with on something and think, would we want the thing we disagree with on to be something the police would be enforcing, writing tickets for, taking you to jail for? And we go, well, no, we don't want them in charge, but if we could be in charge. So over time, the United States law has steadily grown more distant from traditional Christian values as the basis for law, for better or worse. Some people think better, some people think worse. I was told a story about how the ice cream sundae came about. The ice cream sundae came about because something as sinful as a root beer float was considered too far to go at a soda shop on a Sunday. So you weren't allowed to serve those kind of things because that was sinful. And that was the law. The government would enforce that law. If you ran a soda fountain and you served a root beer float on a Sunday, you could get shut down. So to solve the problem, they took out the root beer. And instead of having the carbonated water with the syrup put in the carbonated water, they just took out the carbonated water. And so you get your scoops of your ice cream, and then you would get the syrup put directly on the ice cream without the soda water. And then that didn't violate the law. But what was wrong with serving a root beer float on a Sunday in the first place? And it's because the government was enforcing certain religious principles that said that Sunday was a church day and you weren't allowed to have these other things. Now, how totally accurate that story is, I don't know. As I had shared before, I was told this story. But it sounds like the kind of thing that we would do. So I would be more surprised to find out that no version of that story was true than I would find out that some version of that is true. So for us, the basic legal challenge for any official positions we might take are based on whether a new law is objectively likely to harm people or not. So whether we're granting permissions or removing permissions, whether we're imposing a new regulation or taking away a regulation, we're looking at this malice aspect to it. Are we legitimately protecting people from a malicious danger? And that's where we'll take stands. It's also part of why we take so few political positions. Most political positions are questions of fact more than they're questions of malice. And there are levels at which if the rhetoric was true, then action would be required. But is the truth of the rhetoric settled? And then that's a separate question. In this malice category, besides sins of malice, all the wrong things we do that hurt people, is self-righteousness of malice. Claimed right things that hurt other people. So we're against malice in general. We recognize you can hurt someone, though, doing a right thing. Because you can do a right thing in a really bad way and do a lot of damage on your way to trying to do a right thing. Sometimes in pursuit of such things, and quoting Ephesians 4:15a, speaking the truth in love. I can't tell you how often I've heard someone say, yeah, I just need to speak the truth in love to you. And you know, what they're speaking may or may not be truth, but it is most definitely not loving. But some people can be decidedly unloving about how they go about telling someone what to do. Now, what gets curious about this is, in my observation over my 53 years of living life, a stunning percentage of people that want to tell other people what to do don't give the reciprocal permission for everyone else to tell them what to do. When other people are telling them what to do, one of the most common refrains is some version of, well, they should mind their own business. But then they want to mind everyone else's business. It's not all principles are consistently applied. Now, part of how we land here is because we believe all principles are consistently applied, must be consistently applied, or they're not really principles. That means if I have a right to tell you what to do, for whatever the reason I have a right to tell you what to do, other people should have a right to tell me what to do. And sometimes people will make up some of the weirdest principles to try to justify why I get to boss everyone else around, but no one gets to be the boss of me. And they can't even hear their self-contradiction. It was like the middle manager said, these people need to do what I'm telling them because, darn it, I'm the boss, and they need to respect my position. But then when his bosses would tell him what to do, it's like, they need to understand, I'm the one on the front lines. I'm the one out here. I'm the one who knows. They need to respect the fact that I'm out here doing this. You go, oh, okay. So when it's your boss, it's not, he's the boss, you should listen. But when you're the boss, it's you're the boss, they should listen. When it's the boss bossing you, your principle is, well, I'm the one closer to the front lines. That person needs to listen to me. But when the people working for you are closer to the front lines than you are, you don't have to listen to them. And it wasn't until he said both statements in close proximity to each other, not quite back-to-back sentences, I don't recall, but close, that he said them so close to one another that we could call him on it and he could remember he said both of them like in the last 5 minutes. And he realized he was being very self-aggrandizing. Basically what his real rule was, everyone should listen to me. That's the only rule that was consistent. And when he caught himself on that, he realized that had to change. And he needed to both realize that the people working for him are on the front lines, and so his statement on front lines applies. And he had bosses, and so his statement on bosses applies the other way too. And then, and here's the beauty of stuff like this, the maturity you can develop by reconciling competing principles, because there was a balance there. He did know stuff the bosses didn't know. And so like, oh, okay, so instead of just ignoring the bosses, I need to inform the bosses, just like I need my people to inform me. And if they're making suggestions and guidelines, I can work within those and around those, but if they give me an order, I just have to do it. I can't work it all out, figure it all out. And then you develop a level of maturity and sophistication rather than a very simplistic, I get to do what I want. When people do this speaking the truth in love, malicious self-righteousness, sometimes they are right. They're just being unloving. I had my own mom one time said like, oh, I just had it out with your sister-in-law. This is what I said. She was doing this and I told her that. Was I right? I thought, well, that depends. What was your objective? Was your objective to have your say, or was your objective to make a difference? Well, I just wanted to have my say. Like, well, then congratulations, you succeeded. So if your bullseye is, I just want to have my say, and you had your say, congratulations, you hit your bullseye. And then there's a positive, well, what if I wanted to make a difference? Like, oh, well, if you want to make a difference, I would say you probably missed. Okay, how would I do it if I wanted to make a difference? Like, well, first you have to apologize for how you did it in the first place. And then, in the future, and we worked out a strategy. So sometimes people were right in how they did something, but they're unloving because love is nowhere in their equation. In that case, like, if you just want to have your say, you're not thinking about the other person, you're only thinking about yourself. I want to say what I want to say. I want my outcome that I want, and so I want to declare, my outcome. But if your outcome depends upon the other person doing what you say, then do you have influence with them? If you want to make a difference, that might be a different strategy. Now, some people not only might be right and loving, they might actually be malicious in their rightness. They might be using their rightness as a weapon to attack somebody. And that's even if they really are right, not just being self-righteous. Self-righteousness is my sincere belief in my own rightness, whether I'm right or not. So sometimes the self-righteous people really are right. Sometimes the self-righteous people aren't right. But because they're self-righteous, they don't care either way. There's no arguing with them because whether they're right or not right, they don't care. Because to them, their self is their only reference point for whether they are right or not. And so they think, well, maybe I'm wrong. Let me think. Nope, I don't think I'm wrong, so therefore I'm right. And there's tremendous value to being self-referenced to an objective standard, but you do need to reference an objective standard, preferably an articulable objective standard. Because sometimes they're wrong, but they go ahead anyway, self-righteously assured of their rightness, despite being wrong, and they won't hear it. In fact, I've heard self-righteous people sometimes, they're declaring principles, and the members of the audience hearing their declarations who know them well, go, you do not do these things you are declaring everyone else should be doing. You are just as guilty as the people you're attacking, but for you it's worse because you're saying that this is the standard. And you want to impose the standard that you don't do yourself, which popular culture calls a hypocrite. So often wrongness can be evident to everyone but the person making the self-righteous declarations. So John Maxwell was talking to the CEO, and the CEO said, well, you can't show weakness. If you admit you're wrong, you're showing weakness. And Maxwell was talking to the person, I don't remember the guy's name, I'll use Bob as a fill-in name, says, Bob, everyone knows you were wrong. What they don't know is whether you know you were wrong. If you go admit that you were wrong, you're not telling them something that they didn't know about being wrong, but you're telling them something they didn't know about whether you have enough self-awareness to know how wrong you were. The boss said, oh. And so he goes and admits that he was wrong. And then there's a collective sigh across the organization. They go, oh, okay, our leader has a clue. We have a shot here. Wrongness can often come from a lack of details on the totality of circumstances involved. So people who are self-righteously judgmental, very often they don't know the rest of the story. They may know a sliver of the story. If they knew the rest of the story, their own position might be different. And in fact, I've had times where someone is being really nasty and judgmental, and then sometimes I'll let them have their say and go on for a while, if they don't go on too long. And then I will mention another key detail, a very, very relevant key detail. And I go, oh, well, if I knew that, it's like, but that's the point. You decided to be judgmental without knowing. You decided, oh, I don't need to wait for facts. I can be judgmental now. Oh, I don't need to wonder if there's extenuating circumstances. I can be judgmental now. Because the actual objective is to be judgmental. The objective is not to try to understand and have an influence. The objective is to be judgmental. Because I can feel self-righteous if I can accuse everyone else of being wrong. But if I can't accuse other people of being wrong, at least more wrong than me, it's harder to be self-righteous. Because then I just have to try to be righteous. I don't end up with the biggest building in town by building the biggest building in town. I end up with the biggest building in town by knocking everyone else's buildings down. If the way I can preserve my sense of being self-righteous, being a righteous person, being the right person, is by trying to show why everyone else is wrong, that doesn't make me more right. I become more right, more righteous by living up to high spiritual values. I don't become more spiritual by pointing out where other people are carnal. I become more spiritual by being more loving, more joyful, more peaceful, and the rest of the fruit of the Spirit. That's how I become more spiritual. I become more of what I'm supposed to be. Knocking other people down doesn't make me more. Knocking other people down just makes me think of them less, or think less of them. Very often, and this has been another observation thing, the most judgmental people are the ones most resistant to their own individual growth. They may have lofty aspirations, and Lord knows I have a lot of personal experience having lofty aspirations. There's a lot of the things I would really like to have accomplished at a much, much higher levels than I did. But then they don't do anything about it because they just kind of wanted credit for the aspiration level. Or they need more structure, but they don't build in more structure. I mean, I need more structure. So I have this checklist I'm working now, and I may have bitten off a little more than I can chew on all the physical activity stuff. I don't know yet because I kicked off with 3 days of a liquid fast and 3 days of a live fast. So when I get to good eating, so not junk food eating, but good eating, and I say, okay, how well does my body handle the load then? And I don't know yet, so I'm going to go ahead and push my testing phase through like 7 to 10 days. Usually I'll give it a 1 to 3 day test. But even on day 1, I realized, okay, this is going to need some tweaking. And so on day 1, I tweaked it. So day 2, I had a slightly different list. And I go, this is tough. So I have aspirations just like everyone else. And if I don't have a checklist, if I don't have that list to drive me, I really couldn't tell you how well I would do. So I have a martial arts thing I do, every single month. Sometimes, that's an aspiration. If I didn't have written lists that tell me what all of that stuff is and a way to track roughly how I'm doing, I couldn't tell you if I was doing it. Say, did you do everything this month? I don't know. Probably. Maybe. I guess. I don't know. I should probably look at a list and see if I see that it's like, oh, well, that doesn't even look familiar. Go to like Bali song. Oh, Bali song. Do I have a Bali song? Okay, that probably meant I didn't practice it for a while, right? So I have the aspirations too, but I know I need to build in a structure in order for me to get anywhere in that direction. And I need coaching. I've got a really high-end professional coach who's helping me with a new level of stuff. And I've got my checklist to help organize and drive myself forward. So I have structure that I know I need in order to get to the aspirations. The self-righteous very often don't do any of that. They'll talk about their aspirations. They'll have it conversationally about all these great and grandiose things they're going to do. So they get all this great feedback right now. But the curious thing about a study on this they found the more people talk about their goals, the less they do to achieve their goals. They go, that was kind of a weird outcome. Because one of the things in the self-help community being taught at that time is, share your goals. So now you're on record. Now you have to do it because people are watching. And so that was kind of like a backwards outcome. They're going, whoa, wait a minute. That's not what we expected to find there. But here's what it turned out to be. There is this sense of accomplishment from achieving a goal. You can think of it as like this pleasure bomb goes off. Your heart, that's awesome. Love that feeling. And where did it come from? It came from achieving the goal. But what they found is when people would talk about the goal and people would give them positive feedback about the goal, they're getting all these little pleasure bombs going off inside them for the positive feedback from stating the goal. And then what ended up happening is now they don't need to achieve the goal to get the pleasure bomb from the goal. And there's two things that drive us: pleasure and pain. Pain gets us moving out of this spot because it hurts, but pleasure moves us toward a direction. So you can think of pain as like omnidirectional. If I know I'm standing in this square right here, and you, ow! And it hurts to be right here because the square is electrified and it's shocking me. Which way do I have to go to get off this square? And the answer is, doesn't matter, I just need to move. But I can move in any direction. And that's what pain does. Pain gets you, stop exactly this. But pain doesn't tell you a direction. Pleasure gives you the direction. Well, then what ends up happening is if I can do all of this sequential hard work and boom, there's my pleasure point. I get my goal, pleasure bomb goes off. Ooh, that feels nice. But what if I can stay right here in exactly this spot and I can say, hey, I'm going to move off the square. And then I get pleasure. And the pain turns off for a moment. I go, oh, I don't have to do any actual work. I just have to talk about getting the goal. And I can stay here. So that happens. So when you're dealing with a self-righteous person, they're doing that with righteousness. They have a sense of their own rightness. They have a sense of being their own standard. And by the way, this is all of us. I mean, this is like, well, it's those people. No, this is me too. When I read something in the Bible and I disagree with a conclusion, if I believe the Bible's the Word of God, so I believe those are the right books that God wanted in the book, those are the right words that God wanted in the book, but I don't like the words, what did I just do? I just went to God and said, God, had you talked to me about this before you put that in there, I could have helped you out. So, I mean, I do it too. I try to mitigate it as much as I can. Doesn't mean the thought doesn't pop in my head an awful lot, though. But I will warn you, it is a good thing I'm not God, because I would really mess the system up. Because once I get past that initial reaction, very often I find that there is wisdom in there. So this whole idea of malice, our problem is malice. And so that's why we deal with sins of malice, sins that hurt people. Sins of selfishness or sins of indulgence, sins of self-centeredness that don't hurt other people. No one besides you, if even you, gets hurt by this behavior. And of course, we might spend some time here because selfish sin is often self-destructive. And if the sin of selfishness is playing in legal gray areas, breaking the law, but in a way that doesn't appear to hurt anyone, it might be legally dangerous, meaning someone's not going to be doing damage to their body, but it could be legally dangerous, meaning they could end up in jail, which has repercussions in and of itself. But it's something the person themselves has to choose to leave behind. It still is. And so how many of us have had someone point their finger in our face and say, you need to stop doing the thing, and go, oh, well, thank you for being so mean, nasty, and judgmental about that, because you came and you judged me as a bad human being. That's totally transformed my life. I don't often see that happening very often. So long as no one is being hurt by it, we basically leave it up to the individual. We may have a discussion about the destructive aspects of something or the destructive manifestation of something, but we know there's a totality of the circumstances involved, and rather than pass judgment, we'll very often ask questions, which is kind of our approach with a lot of things. Now, sins of selfishness, of course, can be long-term self-destructive. When someone is on a path of self-destruction, intervention may be appropriate. It may become a form of a sin of malice, except the willing victim is themselves. But again, your question you have to ask yourself is your purpose for intervening here to help the person or to have a say? What's your strategy here? And very often you can tell what someone's real agenda is by watching their approach. And very often when someone approaches someone with just judgment, their real strategy, their real outcome is self-righteousness. If someone approaches someone with connection and questions and seeking understanding and offering of assistance, then very often the motivation is the love of the other person. I recently had someone who I've done counseling with in the past contact me and ask for some help with a drug problem. So she kind of got involved in the scene as a sin of selfishness. And we had conversations about it. But the interesting thing that she noted is I never judged her for it. I never made her the bad person. A whole bunch of other people did. And when finally she decided, this is bad, I need out, she didn't feel like she could talk to any of those other people. Now, but the funny thing with me is I know almost nothing about that. And so all I could do is refer her to someone who does. Now, all of us had various discussions with her. None of us got her to give up her sins of selfishness. But when she was ready to, the only one she was willing to talk to was the one who cared for her, asked her the questions, tried to help her see for herself. That was the person she felt she could still talk to. That was a person she felt she could go to and would love her for making a good decision instead of go, yeah, well, you should have just listened to me 5 years ago. If you just listened to me in the first place, none of this would have happened. She didn't want to talk to any of those people. She wanted to talk to the one who would say, I am so glad that you're ready to deal with this. So how we approach even sins of selfishness is critical to whether we will have an influence. The more self-righteous people just want to have their say. They want to just tell people what to do. The more loving people want to make a difference. They want to leave a door open. And brings us around to sins of connection. Sins of connection are sins that connect people that don't hurt other people. So no one's being hurt by this. And in fact, this might not be bullseye behavior, but it's missing the bullseye willingly to build connection. And we might talk about this area a little, but we don't much worry about sins where no one is being hurt, and we leave it up to individuals. We do seek to drop some wisdom and perspective into the mix when we can, though. Sins of connection can be a category of bullseye missing behavior that can even include things like putting the family first. Even if putting the family first means compromising other values. When we're missing the bullseye, we realize we're missing the bullseye. But we're doing it for family. We're doing it for a good reason. I had a mother recently. She is passionately against abortion. Now, she said she used to be really, really, really pro-choice. Until she had her first baby. And she felt the pregnancy. Her ideology, of course, said, well, not really a baby yet. But then after that baby was born and she was holding that baby in her arms, she felt like, oh my gosh, this baby's been my baby the whole time. I've just been holding and cuddling and surrounding my baby for 9 months inside. Now I'm doing it outside. And she had a pretty strong shift from pro-choice to pro-life. Well, that was decades ago. And then one of her daughters is having an abortion. It's an adult daughter, not living at home anymore, off on her own. She's been rebuilding a relationship with this young woman for the last several years, after being alienated for some years before that. And then this daughter got pregnant by a man she has no desire to have an ongoing relationship with. And the daughter, very much like she was in her own youth, is very, very pro-choice. And she's already decided she's having an abortion. She has her appointment, which I think in the state that she's in wasn't the first appointment. It was like this chain of things she had to do to get there. And she decided to tell her mother that, I'm pregnant, I'm having an abortion. And I'm going in on this day at this time. I would like you to come with me. Now, this mom has a problem now. Now, mom knows her daughter well enough to know there is nothing I will be able to say or do that will get my daughter to change her mind. Anything I say or do is only going to influence whether or not my daughter and I have a relationship from this moment forward. My daughter's going through this. Is she going to go through this by herself, or is she going to go through this with her mom? My daughter is going through this. Is she going to go through this connecting with me deeper, or is this going to be a wedge that drives us apart again? My daughter is going to go through this. Am I going to have influence after this is over, or no influence after this is over? Well, you can imagine this is a struggle. So mom needed some counsel. And a lot of my questions just had to do with, can you influence this outcome? And she was very, very certain. It's like, no, I can't. It's like, I would adopt the child as my own. It's not going to make a difference. Like, is your daughter aware of all of her options? Like, yes, she is. And she even knows that, I would love to have another grandbaby. I will help. I will be there. I will even take care of the baby. But she says no. Like, all right, well, you've done what you can. So then you're back to those questions. Does she go through this with you or without you? And for our sins of connection thing, I am less concerned with the sex than I am about the baby. And if mom drives this wedge, and here's where we ultimately landed, if mom drives this wedge, her influence is over. If mom chooses this time to connect, here's what we pulled off. We got the daughter on long-term birth control after. And she told her daughters, like, this violates my values. You know how I feel about abortion. But I am not going to stand by as your mother and let you go through this by yourself. But I don't ever want to go through this with you again. So how about when we're done with this, we start to immediately make arrangements for long-term birth control so you never get pregnant again until you're ready. And the daughter agreed. Now, what if mom had stood her ground and said, darn it, I've got my bullseye. What you're doing is wrong. I will not be a part of it. Well, then we might have the same problem again in another year. And a year after that. And a year after that. We could end up half a dozen or a dozen abortions into the process before eventually the daughter is old enough and thinking, like, oh, I think I might want to keep this one. So what did she do? She did something she believed was a sin. That misses the bullseye. In direct contravention of her values for the value of connecting with her daughter, with the objective of having an influence so that this doesn't happen again. when she realized I can't stop it from happening this time. Is that ideal? Way not ideal. But why'd she do it? To connect. To connect with a person in a situation she can't do anything about. And she succeeded. And while she can't do anything about this situation, it has allowed her to have influence over future situations. And sometimes we do that. Now, in some places, I've seen more lofty sounding spiritual goals. They can be doing ministry in a country where it's illegal to do so. They're breaking the law. And don't we have some obligation to follow the law? But they're breaking the law to do something they believe is more important than the law of the land. In the culture they're going to, they're lawbreakers. Maybe heretics. Maybe infidels. If they get caught doing ministry there, the repercussions can be severe. But they'll go anyway. Missionaries are putting their families at risk. Parents are putting their children at risk sometimes to go do ministry. Is putting your family at risk ideal? Is that hitting a mark? Or is it because you're pursuing a higher value? So sins of connection can be lofty things. And we will sometimes surrender bullseye hitting on other things to pursue our lofty things. Sin? Probably. But aiming for another bullseye. And I have to miss this one to hit that one. I have to decide, is that one important enough to me to be willing to miss this one? Now, when I say sins of connection, very often people think of sexual sin, which is a fairly obvious thing, and I said I would talk about that separately. Sexual sins are often considered sins of connection. Question has never shied away from talking about sex. We've talked about marital sex, non-marital sex, premarital sex, extramarital sex. We have an entire set of programs, 2 programs just on sex. One is The Talk, which is aimed at having discussions about sex with people who don't really know that much about sex. And so it's something that you can use as a framework to discuss things with a preteen or a teen. And then there's Awesome Sex, which is kind of aimed at committed couples. So we don't shy away from the subject at all. One of the basic things we note is that sex is how you make babies. And while the sex itself might be motivated by connection, once there's a baby involved, the deal changes. And if you believe pregnancy is a baby, then killing the baby would be malice. Now, if you don't believe that pregnancy is a baby, well, then killing a baby wouldn't be malice. It might be selfishness. It might even be connection in some way with somebody else. But it wouldn't be malice. But if you believe it is a baby, now it's malice toward the baby. And so while the sex itself might be motivated by connection, once there is a baby involved, at whatever point you believe the baby becomes a baby, the deal changes. If you have a baby that you decline to take care of, as happens too often with males with baby mamas, that could be some blend of selfishness and malice. A pregnancy totally changes the whole deal around sex, and with about half of all pregnancies occurring outside of marriage, they are presumably unplanned, and the couple engaging in sex presumably did not think it would occur. So it's a thing to discuss. And whenever I'm dealing with unmarried couples having sex, one of my questions has to do, what's the plan for pregnancy? So, well, we're not going to get pregnant. It's like, well, why aren't you going to get pregnant? Well, just, because. Like, well, because why? Well, we usually use birth control. Like, wait. Usually? Well, it's worked 100% so far. So that's not the way 100% works. So when it fails, does that mean it failed 100%? Well, no. All you have to do is have the pregnancy happen one time. So what's the plan? Now, at my age, dating women in their 50s, the plan to avoid pregnancy might have been, menopause was a few years ago. Say, okay, so it's biologically impossible. But if it's just kind of basically rolling dice, no matter what your odds are, what's the plan? What are you going to do? So it does become a thing to discuss. But when it comes to like talking people down from sexual sin, honestly, we don't worry about that so much. We'll talk about ideals. We'll have conversations. There's just a lot of things we just really don't bother with. We're more interested in who's being hurt. Is someone being hurt? Now, what gets to be curious about some stuff is like Jesus himself, individually, as a person, was very emphatic in his own words, saying, "Judge not, lest you be judged. For by the same measure by which you judge others, so shall you be judged." So that all principles must be consistently applied thing is huge. And most of us realize that, okay, when someone's being judgmental toward me, that hurts. And yet we do it to people all the time. Jesus himself, individually, as a person, when he was here, says, "Forgive. Forgive, and it shall be forgiven. For he who does not forgive shall not be forgiven." This is pretty serious stuff. And depending how that unforgiveness manifests in behavior, it can be pretty malicious to not forgive. In particular, if that person back over there is the one who stabbed me, but I'm bleeding all over you. My unwillingness to forgive that person from my past might be malicious toward you. Because I'm telling you, I don't care if I keep hurting you because of what someone else did to me. Or it could just be selfishness. And I just don't want to deal with it. I like giving myself permission to do the bad things that I do. And so some people won't let go because of that. As simple a thing as I had a woman in my counseling office one time. We were finally coming down to her last really core issue. And she didn't want to deal with it. And I said, well, why not? Just curious. Because then I'd be responsible. So what it was is that event became the driver of fear that then she could use to justify every decision she ever made. But if she didn't have that, then she had to take responsibility for what I decided this. And go, well, you're already responsible because you're deciding to hold on to it. Says, well, I know, but it's different. And she just wasn't there. She just wasn't ready to take that step. Many sin issues can be contextualized in Malice, selfishness, connection model. It would be much more generally accepted by all that things that hurt others are wrong. So that's an easy conversation to have. Almost no one I've ever talked to thinks that someone hurting them is okay. And most people I talk to who know they're hurting other people know that it would be way, way better if they didn't hurt other people. Now, they may have a sin of selfishness connected as a driver for why they want to give themselves permission to continue to be so hurtful. But even though they give themselves permission to continue to be hurtful, they don't look at the hurtful thing they're doing as okay. So you almost always get agreement on malice issues. You may not get agreement on what constitutes malice or not all the time. There's some fuzzy areas where people may put up an argument. But generally speaking, when you're talking about malicious things, things that hurt other people, you're going to get agreement. You can have that discussion with just about anybody. We can probably win people over to our side with that argument. But when it comes to self-indulgent, self-centered sin, that's tougher. Many people believe self-indulgent or self-centered sin is their own business. And they may be right. But by having the discussion from this framework, we can often stay more engaged. And if at some point in time someone who's been continuing down this relatively self-destructive path is ready to get off the path, we still have a relationship so that if we're trying to toss them a lifeline, they're willing to take it. because we maintain a connection that will allow us to have an influence, which means that when they are ready to be helped, we can help. But it can be tough. And we can be more persuasive long term than by taking a more judgmental stance. Because I might want to make my argument right here, right now, and I don't care if I ruin the relationship. But you know, if I get a chance to have the discussion several times over several years, I might be in a much better position to actually persuade someone of a right thing. But if I do it in a damaging way that now they don't want to talk to me anymore, I might have lost my influence. So if my goal is to make a difference, I might have to settle for making no difference now, which I wasn't going to make anyway, to make a little bit of difference a whole bunch of times, which has a chance of at least accumulating, even not just with myself, but with other little differences other people might make. And sometimes all I manage to do is mitigate, compensate a little bit for the damage other people have done by being so mean and judgmental. Trying to help people find the treasure in them to make up for how many times people have called them trash, treated them like trash, justified why they ought to be treated like trash. Now, this whole thing of staying connected is even more important when the issue might be a sin of connection. So the idea in all of this is to be a light, not a judge. Be a light, not a judge. Not just don't be a judge. Don't be a judge is only half of the statement. It's be a light. So you don't say like, well, the judgmental approach isn't going to work, so I'm just going to be not judgmental. Because the other half of the philosophy is still try to be a light. Now, the easiest way to be a light is to be an example. So they can see the example. But the idea of be a light, not a judge, in short, to remember this principle. The more harshly we judge and try to tell people what to do, the more we push them away. So think about how you feel when you're accused. Even when it might be just. Say you really did something and someone just jumps on you. How do you feel about it? How do you feel even when someone's right and they are nasty to you? They jump on you about how you're worthless. They jump at you at how you're bad. And they treat you that way too. Even if only in the time of their emotional intensity. But they treat you like that too. Does that make it, oh, how sweet. Oh, I'm so glad that they love me this way. This totally motivates me to want to be a better person. Or do you have a more defensive reflex? Now, it could go any of three ways, basically, in some version of whatever yours looks like. A common one is people fight back. Someone judges me, darn it. Well, who are you to judge me? Da, 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 da. Maybe counterattacking in the fighting back. If someone has an internal self-talk dialogue that basically says, yeah, you're right, I'm worthless, I'm scum, I've always been scum, I'm horrible, I'm terrible. Sometimes it's a sympathy play. Sometimes it's overplaying the bad guy hand so that you will stop attacking and be more sympathetic. So sometimes it's a sympathy play. But as often as not, it's all those terrible things you're telling them is just reinforcing a self-talk dialogue, maybe from things they picked up years ago. The way one of my friends words it sometimes is, sometime when you were probably very young, someone lied to you about you, and you believed them, and you've been telling yourself the same lie ever since. Another thing that happens very often when you feel judged, even rightly, and you can decide this for yourself, don't you tend to either fight back, stand there and take it because you think you deserve it because you really are scum, or you break relationship. You leave. If someone attacks me, if they're coming after me, and I'm on my way home to have dinner with my family, and I can just ignore them, get in my car, go home, have dinner with my family. For myself, I'm likely to just get in my car, go home, and have dinner with my family. I win. That's what I was going to do in the first place. I get to go do it. I win. And if someone decides they want to attack me, well, I have a strong belief relationship is between partners, not opponents. And if someone wants to treat me like an opponent, okay, well, I guess we're not partners then. And if we're not partners, well, I partner with partners. I don't partner with opponents. So if you want to be an opponent, well, then you're not my partner, and that's okay. We don't have to have this relationship. And so I'm totally okay with that. And so that's my strategy. It's like, look, I'm not here to fight. I don't want to fight with people. And I'm certainly not going to stand here and take it. So I'm just going to change the relationship. So I'm not going to stand here. I'm going to leave. So I'm not going to be the victim. And I'm not going to get in a fight because I don't fight with partners. And if I can avoid it, I don't even fight with opponents either. It's like, do I have to fight? If it doesn't have to be a fight, all right, well, I'm going to go home and have dinner with my family then. I win. And so that's my reaction. But what's yours? Has anyone ever been condemning of you and judgmental of you motivated you to want to be better? Has that been the best strategy that has worked for you? And yet, how often do we try that strategy with other people? Now, that's when it's just. How do you feel when a judgment is unjust? When a condemnation is unjust? You are not guilty of what they say. You didn't do what they accuse you of. You know you're not the worthless one here. You know you're not the bad one here. And you're being attacked for it anyway. Now how do you feel? And very often, it's just because the other person might have a point, but they jump to a conclusion without all the facts. Which is a declaration, I don't need all the facts. I get to decide you're a bad person anyway. I don't need to know the rest of the details. I can already decide you're worthless. And when people say, oh, well, had I known. Like, well, you could have known if you talked about it first. You could even possibly, just a wild idea here, consider giving someone the benefit of the doubt. Because don't we like it when people give us the benefit of the doubt? Even if we're bad sometimes, if someone says, well, I looked at this thing that, I saw you doing this, and that looked bad to me. But I thought I should check. Because I don't want to decide you're doing something bad unless you're doing something bad. And so I'm kind of following up a little bit here. But do any of those things make you want to draw closer? When people do that to you? Doesn't make me want to draw closer when people do it to me. So I don't use that strategy on other people. So our goal is that if we are the only gospel somebody reads, if we are all people see of Christianity, all people see of this congregation, all people see of my dojo, my martial arts, my family, if I am the only man a woman knows, and I become the reference point for what men are like, whatever the category is I'm working in, if I am the only one somebody knows, will I draw people closer or push people away? So if we're the only gospel someone reads, that our life and our way we love people, the way we bring joy to people, and are at peace with ourselves and others, we want that to draw people to Christ rather than repel people from Christ. So to be a light, not a judge. Well, the light is just help them see. Help them see for themselves. People won't argue with their own decision. If I judge someone, someone might argue with that. defend themselves against that judgment, distance themselves from that judgment. But if I can just help people see a thing, then there's a chance for them to make a different decision. And that's what we're doing as being a light. A big part of being a light is what for us we call a sensei way of teaching. Sensei way of teaching is to walk the path. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. The way is the path. So we walk the path, we do the way in such a manner so we can show other people that path. So as we unpack sensei, it's walk the path, show others the way. Leaders go first. So good, I just be the example. And sometimes that shows up in some of those interesting places too. Because like say if I believe wives should submit to their husbands. All right, well I am also under authority. So how do I submit to authority when I'm the one under authority? Do I ever complain about those having authority over me? Do I reserve the right to exercise my own discretion over what ought to and not ought to be done, over what's morally right and morally wrong? And like for my brother one time, he was an accountant and he was told to not expense stock options. And he said, our stock options are a major expense in this company. I have to expense the stock options. I said, well, no, it's not legally required. So I don't care if it's legally required. It's morally wrong to do so. Well, he expects submission to him the same way. So when he's in charge, he expects his people to be evaluating as they go and to push back if he were ever to try to push for something wrong. Because that's what he would do. That's what he did do. And because he expects his people to push back if he's ever morally wrong, then he has to therefore seek to not ever give them a reason to have to push back. Because he's not in charge, the values are in charge. He's just the leader there to exercise the value out of his position. The same thing like if you're going to be a traditional Christian husband, and your wife is supposed to submit to you as a good Christian husband. It's like, all right, well, if I'm not in charge, there's a higher authority in charge, higher values are in charge. And it is the responsibility of those under my authority to push back against me when I'm doing something that violates those values, and so therefore my goal is to not ever give them a need to have to push back. And that's part of being a light. You illuminate things, you illuminate issues. What do I expect? What am I looking at? What am I seeing here? How do you want to live your life? Is this the choice that you're making on purpose? I mean, I flat out asked people, like, well, is this what you want? And they said, yes. Do you choose this? Now, you got to have spirit, soul, body model. You get will over mind over emotion. What I said is, okay, emotion. You want it? All right, let's see what you want. Let's step it up 2 levels. Will. Do you choose it? And sometimes that answer is no. You don't choose it. You want it, but you don't choose it. I had 3 days of liquid fast and 3 days of live food fast. Boy, have I had that wanting, not choosing thing going on the last 6 days. But you make your decisions. But it can go in a positive way too. Like, so do you want to make money? Yes. Do you choose to do what it takes to make money? Often that answer is, well, no. But I want the money. Okay, you want a job? Well, yeah, I want a job. Okay. Do you choose to do what it takes to go get a job? Well, yeah, I put in a couple of applications last week. Okay, 2 applications a week is probably not the way to get gainfully employed in a short amount of time. How much savings do you have? Okay, 6 weeks of savings, you got to work faster than that. And so what you want and what you choose are 2 different things. And you might choose some wonderful aspirations. That means you're going to do them. Or you might just want some wonderful aspirations, but you haven't chosen them. So it makes you feel good, but you're not doing anything about it because you haven't made a choice. And you get all these things, all these different ways we miss bullseyes. And remember, that's all sin is. Sin is a missed bullseye. Sometimes sins are really, really bad. Sometimes the target's that way and you shot it in the completely opposite direction. That's rebellion. I refuse to shoot at that target. I'm going to shoot at what I want to shoot. That's rebellion. All the way up to, I thought I had it. I thought I had it. I was zeroed in on the bullseye. I let the arrow fly, and just so close. I missed it by just that much. It's all sin. In the sense the bullseye still didn't get hit. But what you do with it and what you do about it might vary incredibly. And we focus on sins of malice. We're most concerned when people are doing wrong things that get other people hurt. We worry less about when people are doing wrong things that might only be hurtful to themselves, and we generally don't worry at all about people who are doing wrong things in order to connect with people. And that's our values here in charge, because we have a focus. Our focus is on being loving. A core part of being loving is, okay, well then stop hurting people. And then because we believe that loving others, you should be loving others as yourself, now include the don't hurt people, but don't hurt yourself either. And as we deal with human beings and we deal with sin, very often I find people ignore sins of malice, and very often ignore sins of selfishness, and they're jumping all over sins of connection, even on a societal level. Well, we find if we start on the other side and we focus on sins of malice and then sins of selfishness, we often don't even get to sins of connection, which is fine with me, because I have enough to work on in my own life that hurt other people and can hurt myself. If I could get all those down, my life would be so much better. If I could get the people around me to just stop hurting other people, that would be huge. If I could get the people around me to just stop hurting themselves, that would be huge. And once nobody's getting hurt, well, now let's refine this down to the sins of connection level. Now, one of the reasons why I can leave that stuff alone is there's plenty of people out there who are jumping all over that stuff. I focus on where I focus because of my values. We focus collectively for our group where we focus because of our values. Love being a primary value. Stop hurting people. Okay, now love yourself the same way. Stop hurting yourself. So far, including myself, I have not yet gotten to a place where I've nailed those two completely. Not with myself, not in anyone I've coached or counseled. We got enough stuff to worry about that's doing damage for me to spend much time on the things that isn't. And so that's my perspective. Someone else's perspective might be different. And obviously it is, because we see a lot of things being done different. But that's okay with us. We be who we be because this is who we've chosen to be. Other people will be who they choose to be because they choose to be it. Ministries will choose to be what the ministries choose to be. They will serve who they serve. And next week we're going to talk about another interesting aspect of ministry called a bump. A biblical unique ministry proposition. So we're going to unpack a few of these things. So before I leave, I wanted to leave with the foundation. And I thought that this was an important one to share. I hope it has been illuminating. If you have my notes from 12 years ago, however many years ago it was, 10 years ago, you will notice that the teaching is a little different. So you can't just find the old message somewhere and go, okay, it's exactly the same thing. It's always my hope for myself and my hope for anyone who leads and teaches that you will continue to evolve over time because you will continue to learn over time. And as you see things more clearly, hopefully you can kind of refine your principles to be more useful and more loving. But whether you're listening to this one right here, right now, whether you're getting the shorter version of this lesson in Christian Liberty that I taught a few years back, or the original teaching on sins of malice, sins of selfishness, sins of connection from a decade ago, to have this basic idea, this basic idea. We want Christians to not be hurting people. We want Christians to not be hurting themselves. If we can get us to stop hurting people and we can get us to stop hurting ourselves, then we'll go focus on some of the other stuff more. Till then, might be a periodic discussion focused primarily on shedding light, not passing judgment. I hope this has been a useful, maybe mind-tweaking lesson. Partly connected to what is our business and what isn't our business and why, and at what level and in what way. We just want people to love people, and that means not hurt people.